These are the Blue Birds of Happiness. That's what I decided. So that was pretty easy to figure out to color them in blue. So they are colored in with the slate gray. This is Prismacolor. And the hearts are Crimson Lake. And I did do a little bit of shading. So first I just colored the whole bird in with just a light color. And then I applied a little bit more pressure to my pencil and went under the wing and along the tail behind the wing a little bit like that to, oops, I got some red there, to kind of make the wing pop out a little bit. And then also on this heart, I filled it in very lightly, and then I put a little more pressure on my pencil and I kind of shaded around the edges of it to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And what you could just see there, there's a little bit of red on here. So after I color it, I have to fix it with a fixative, and I use the Jacquard Textile 100 Colorless Extender, and this is available on Amazon, and a little bit lasts a long, long time. And then just a craft brush. It's kind of stiff, not too stiff, and it's not too pointy. So I went ahead and I applied just a light layer over the blue. I didn't go out into the other part of the fabric. You want to keep it just where you have colored. And then I should have rinsed my brush, but I didn't. And I went ahead and I colored over the reds, and it worked out okay. They didn't turn purple, but I did notice some of that red is now on my brush. So if I go back to go over on any other color, that red is going to show. So you want to make sure, it's always a good idea to rinse your brush between colors. Now, the other thing I want to mention is this is my rough design, which I printed on freezer paper. It's 8.5 by 11 freezer paper. And the design that you will receive is a little more refined than this. And then I printed it in reverse. I ironed the wax side of the freezer paper to the back of my fabric, and now it stabilizes it. So the pattern and the fabric are stuck together. The fabric is stabilized, which makes drawing and tracing much, much easier. And I trace my design, and then I color my design while it's still hooked on there. Paint on the fixative, wait for it to dry, or you could take it off now and let it dry. Either way, it dries well with the freezer paper on the back. It doesn't take that much longer. And then once that's dry, then I can start stitching. This is love, the perfect little word for February, the month of love. And these, I didn't do a whole lot of coloring on this. I did the birds and then the hearts. Now these leaves, I used a fishbone stitch, and I went ahead and stitched them all, so I don't have one to show you, so I'm going to do one down here to just kind of give you an example of how to do it. So what you need to do is pull your needle up at the top of the leaf. So we're going to pretend the stem is down here. So that's the top of the leaf. And I like to bring my needle all the way down to the bottom of the leaf. Now I'll have a center line. I'm going to bring my needle back up near the top on the drawn line on one side of where I initially pulled my needle up. So there's my center line. Now I'm going to take my thread down almost halfway, not quite, and then my needle, and then come up on the other side of that initial stitch. And I'm on the drawn line. And so it crosses over that first line. I'm going to cross over that again and come up right next to where that other stitch was on this side. Now I'm going to cross over again and come down just a little bit. And you keep bringing your needle up on the drawn line. So these stitches are all touching each other like a satin stitch would be. So it's a nice way to fill in a stitch. And the fishbone stitch just leaves this nice little V down the center that I like. So it's just a matter of working from side to side And then when you get closer to the bottom, your needle is just going to go down into that the little base here. So I'm just going to put the needle right in that base to finish this little leaf off. So that is called a fishbone stitch. Okay, so I did color in the hearts, and I just outlined the big heart. But for these little hearts, I wanted to go ahead and fill them in with a satin stitch. So it works out well if you color it in first, so that if your stitches aren't perfect, you see this below it rather than the color of the fabric. I like to start in the center, so in the top of that groove at the top of the heart, and then come down at the point, and then just go up right next to where that was. This is a stitch that might be helpful to use a hoop. If you feel better using a hoop, then I would definitely do that. You want your stitches right next to each other, touching each other. And this is definitely one you have to just take your time with. And down right there. And then I go over to the other side. And the only time this wouldn't work is if you were using a really variegated thread and you happen to be right where the thread was changing colors. I'm having a hard time getting it right where I want it. There we go. So now I'm just going to do the other side the same way. And for some reason, for me, I think it's easier to do a satin stitch using one strand of thread, like this Faldani 12 weight, as opposed to two strands of, say, DMC, because in order for it to lay really flat, if you're using two threads and they twist like that, it's not going to lay quite as flat, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's the little heart all satin stitched. So for this guy's legs, there's these little V's. And you can see what I did here is I filled it in. It's like a satin stitch where it's all touching each other, but it's more like a fan. So all the stitches just meet at the bottom point. So I'm going to start on one side of his little leg. Oh. Okay. I'm going to start on one side of his little leg, come down at the center, and then come up on the other side of that little leg, down in the center again, and then just start filling it in. Always ending at the little V at the bottom. And just like that, it's all filled in. So I'll finish this one. The other little stitches in the bird, those are just running stitches. And the eye isn't a French knot. It's just a straight stitch, but a very tiny little straight stitch. So now that we have his legs, we need his little feet. So they're going to be stitched on after you've stitched the branches, because they're going to be holding onto the branches. So it's just one straight stitch that goes down over the branch. There and there. So now he's holding on tight, so he shouldn't go anywhere. And then the last stitch on this one is the beak. And I'm using this bronze, which has a variety of color in it. Right down here where the knot is, it's really dark brown. Up here it gets to be a little more golden, and that's actually the color that I want to use for the beak. So I'm going to be real intentional about what color what part of the thread I'm using when I'm stitching the beak. And I'm going to go with that really light color. So I had pressed this at one point and I lost my little beak lines. So I'm just going to draw them on there so you can see where it is. It's a little chunkier than I think what's on the actual pattern. But I went ahead and stitched this stem, and now I'm going to stitch the beak, and it's just going to go right over the stem. Because if I stitch the beak first, then I'd have to stop and start the stem so that it would look like it was behind or inside of his beak. And I did this the same way I did the little legs. It's kind of a little fan where they all join up at the point. So this one is completely done. And this is stitched on the Moda linen. I think it's a gorgeous fabric. And then the next way that I stitched it up was on the Moda Crackle, and I'm just using one color, and this is a DMC, and it looks chunky because it is chunky. Instead of using 2 strands, I'm using 3 strands of the floss. Now, when you're using multiple strands of floss, even if it's 2, you're going to pull out 1 at a time instead of 2 or 3 at a time. And that way it won't twist quite as badly as you're stitching. It really helps with that. So on this one, I'm going to show you how I did the stems where they're kind of whiter. And if you'll notice on the V, as I'm threading my needle, I've already done one side of it. And now I'm going to go back and do the other side. So instead of stopping my stitches like here, if I had done this one first, then I'd have to stitch a little bit and then stitch farther and then stitch a little bit and then stitch farther. So instead, I just go ahead and stitch the one on bottom first and then stitch the one on top. This sample, I didn't do the fishbone stitch for the leaves. I just did a really simple stem stitch. So this one's really, really simple. Okay, so now I'm going to show you, I'm just going to do a very simple stem stitch up this side. I like to start with about 1/8 of an inch, and I come back almost to where I started, and then 1/8 of an inch, come back in the same hole. And I'm just going to go right over those previous stitches. So the trick on making a thick branch like this and having it subtly go down to a single row of stitches is you just want to be really careful about how you blend where the rows end. And I'll show you that in a second here. So let me finish this little guy. Okay, so I have my first row done. Now I'm going to start my second row. And I'm just going to stitch right alongside that first row so that they're touching each other. And one thing I noticed that helps is if I carry my thread on the same side as the previous stitch, the previous row, rather than carry it on this side. So I'm going to carry it on that side, and I'm just going to do the same thing, or I'm just going to do another row of stem stitches. We'll go up here a little ways. And then we want it to blend in. So I'm going to just kind of take some small stitches, and then I'm going to kind of move over to the first row and stitch over that, and then end in that middle of the first row. So it has a nice blended feel, so it isn't just choppy from thick to thin. Now while I'm there, I'm just going to go over it and go ahead and do this leaf. And I wanted to show you how I like to do the tips of my leaves. Hopefully I have enough thread here. Okay, so there's the little stem. And what I will do, just because I want my threads to stay in the right place, I'm just going to put my needle through one of the stitches on the back, and that anchors it. So now I can bring my needle up in that same hole, and the thread's not going to come in, or it's not going to, it will work. Okay, so you're going to carry your thread on the outside of the curve. And we're just taking small little stitches until we get up to this point. So there's my needle in the point. Now I'm going to take one extra little stitch, just going over maybe 3 threads of the fabric. Now when I come down the other side, I'm going to start my stitch, and instead of bringing my needle up at the tip of that point, I'm going to bring it up right where the thread comes out of the fabric. So back there. So the needle will go up right in that same hole as where the thread was coming down before. Only I wanted the thread to be on the outside like that. Okay, so I hope that made sense to you. Okay, I'm going to show you this one more time just to make sure you got it. On the leaves, you're going to go stitch one side, and since it's a curve this way, the thread's going to go on the outside of the curve. My last stitch is going to go right at the tip of the leaf, and now I'm going to take one additional stitch, just 2 or 3 threads of the fabric. Now I'm going to carry the thread on the outside, since it's curved that way. I'm going to take 1/8 of an inch, come back up in the same hole where the thread is coming out of. Not at that tip, but where the thread is coming out. And now you can see it gives it a nice point on the end of that leaf. Like that. I like that. The last thing I want to show you on here are the ties. So this V here is held together by a bow. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a couple stitches over the branches to hold them in place. Like that. And then we're going to do a lazy daisy. So you're going to start at the base of that loop and then bring your needle down in the same spot. Bring your needle up at the top of the loop, and your thread goes under the needle, and then you just tack it right on the other side of that loop. I'm going to bring my needle up right there again at the top of this. Since this is such a short stitch and it's kind of like the end of the tie of the bow, I'm not going to stem stitch it. It's just going to be one long stitch. So now February is all finished. Here it is with the red work. And here it is with the different colored threads and a little bit of colored pencil. So I hope you have a wonderful February, and we'll see you in March.